They say the last sense to go is your hearing. I always thought that was just a comforting myth doctors told grieving families to make them feel better, a way to say goodbye to someone who wasn't really there. But as I lay in that cold, clinical bed, trapped in the suffocating darkness of my own body, I realized it was a terrifying truth. I was in a coma, yes. My eyes were shut tight, and my lungs were being forced to breathe by a rhythmic clicking machine. To the world, I was a vegetable. To my father, I was an obstacle that was finally being cleared out of the way. Within those first few seconds of my silence, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was witnessing the ultimate family betrayal. My name is Alexa, and I used to believe that here in Charleston, family and faith were the only things that truly mattered. We are a people of Southern hospitality, Sunday brunches, and a sweet as honey charm that masks the humidity. But beneath the surface of my father's perfectly tailored suits and his prestigious reputation lay a greed so dark it could swallow the Atlantic. My father, Bernard, wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively ushering me toward the exit. I could hear the door to my ICU room creak open. I recognized his footsteps immediately, heavy, confident, and entirely devoid of the frantic pace of a grieving parent. Then, I heard the clicking of heels. Victoria. She was the woman he'd brought into our lives barely 6 months after my mother passed. The woman he'd used to practically replace me before I even hit the floor. Is she still, Victoria's voice was like sandpaper on silk. She didn't sound worried. She sounded impatient, like she was waiting for a slow waiter to bring her a check. "The doctors say there's no change," Bernard replied, and I could practically hear the cold shrug in his voice. "She's just taking up space now." Honestly, Victoria, it's a blessing in disguise. The medical bills are starting to eat into the estate, and we have better things to do with that $485,000 inheritance my mother left her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and slap the smugness right off his face. That money was my mother's legacy, meant to keep our family home secure. But I couldn't even twitch a finger. I was a ghost in my own skin. "We need to think about the arrangements, Bernard," Victoria whispered, her voice getting closer to my ear. I could smell her expensive, cloying perfume, the one she bought with my father's credit card. "We don't want to be scrambling when the time comes. People will talk if it's not handled right. I've already called the funeral home," my father said, and my heart, if it were under my control, would have stopped right then. I told them to prepare for a small service. Nothing fancy. Tell them to buy the cheapest casket they have. Why waste good money on someone who won't even know the difference? I need that cash to cover the debts from the dealership. He was planning my funeral, while I was still warm, while my heart was still beating. He was already spending my life's value on his own mistakes. But what Bernard didn't realize was that I wasn't just listening to his plans. I was memorizing every single word. And he had no idea that I wasn't the only one in this room who knew he was lying. Because just as Bernard started talking about pulling the plug to save on the daily ICU costs, I felt something. A warm, firm hand squeezed mine under the hospital sheets. A hand that didn't belong to a doctor, and certainly didn't belong to a traitor. But who was this secret ally? And what did they know about my father's plan that could change everything? Growing up in Charleston, my father was the king of the front porch. To the neighbors at the country club, Bernard was a pillar of the community, a man who shook hands with the governor and never missed a Sunday service at St. Philip's. But inside our home, the air was different. It was heavy with his expectations and his obsession with the family image. When my mother passed away, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I thought we would grieve together. I thought the mother's legacy was a safety net for our shared future, but Bernard didn't see a daughter in mourning. He saw a ledger that needed balancing. Within 3 months, Victoria appeared. She didn't just enter our lives, she colonized them. She was 20 years younger than my father, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and a wardrobe that screamed new money, paid for by old secrets. "Alexa, darling," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake honey, Don't you think this old furniture is so depressing? We need to breathe new life into this house." By new life, she meant erasing every trace of my mother. She replaced the heirloom quilts with sterile, modern fabrics and moved my childhood photos to the dusty corners of the attic. When I protested, Bernard didn't defend me. He looked at me with a cold, distant irritation, as if I were a ghost haunting his new, shiny happiness. Then came the accident. A rainy night on the Ravenel Bridge, a hydroplaning car, and then nothing but the hum of the ICU. My father didn't see a tragedy. He saw a final solution. While I lay there, trapped in a silent cage, he and Victoria were already redecorating my life. They weren't just taking my room. They were erasing my existence before my heart even stopped beating. But as I lay there in the dark, hearing the rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator, I realized Bernard had made one fatal mistake in his haste to replace me. He assumed that because I couldn't speak, I had no one left in this city to fight for me. He forgot about Monique, my mother's oldest friend, and the only person who knew exactly what was written in the secret codicil of my mother's will. And as Monique's hand tightened around mine in that hospital room, I realized she wasn't just there to comfort me. She was there to deliver a warning that would turn my father's perfect world upside down. The afternoon sun was likely streaming through the hospital blinds, painting a picture of a peaceful Charleston day outside. But inside my room, the air was thick with a calculated, cold-blooded cruelty. I lay there, a prisoner in my own skin, forced to listen as the two people who should have been praying for my recovery turned my ICU bedside into a boardroom for my own demise. "Bernard, we have to be smart about the timing," Victoria whispered. I could hear the rustle of paper, likely a brochure. "If we pull the plug on Tuesday, it looks better. It gives the impression of a valiant weekend fight. The country club set will eat it up. You'll be the grieving, heroic father, and I'll be the supportive rock." "You're right," my father grunted. I heard the unmistakable sound of him pouring water into a plastic cup. "The doctors keep talking about brain activity and potential, but every day she stays on these machines, it's another $5,000 coming out of my pocket. I've already contacted the estate attorney. That $485,000 inheritance from her mother is sitting there like a ripe peach, just waiting for a signature, and God knows I need it. The dealership is underwater, Victoria. If I don't get that cash, we lose the beach house by next month." My heart screamed in the silence. My mother had left me that money specifically to protect me from my father's gambling habits and failed business investments. She knew his character better than anyone, but even she couldn't have predicted this level of family betrayal. "And what about the big one?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to a low, hungry purr. "The life insurance? You said it was a $1.2 million policy." "Exactly," Bernard replied, and I could almost hear the greedy smirk on his face. "As soon as the death certificate is signed, that policy pays out. Between the inheritance and the insurance, we're not just surviving, Victoria. We're thriving. We'll have the funeral on Friday, keep it modest to respect her wishes, and then we're taking that trip to Europe we talked about. By the time the dirt settles, Alexa will just be a sad memory and a very large bank balance." They were talking about me like I was a used car they were ready to scrap for parts. They had no idea that behind my fluttering eyelids, I was documenting every word, every plan, every cent they intended to steal. They thought I was a liability, but I was actually the only thing keeping them from total ruin. But as my father leaned over me, his breath smelling of stale coffee as he fake sobbed for a passing nurse, I felt Monique's hand squeeze mine again. This time, it wasn't just a squeeze of comfort. She leaned in close, her voice a barely audible breath against my ear. "I hear them too, Alexa," she whispered. "And they have no idea what your mother actually did with that policy." The darkness didn't feel so absolute anymore. For the first time since the accident on the bridge, the cold weight on my chest felt a little lighter. Monique wasn't just my mother's best friend. She was a shark in a floral Sunday dress. She knew exactly who Bernard was, and more importantly, she knew the lengths my mother had gone to in order to protect me from him. I heard the heavy ICU door swing open again, and the atmosphere shifted. Bernard's voice immediately changed, switching from the cold, calculating businessman back to the grieving father persona he wore for the public. "Oh, Monique," Bernard sighed, his voice thick with fake exhaustion. "I didn't see you come in. It's been so hard. The doctors, they don't give us much hope. It's a tragedy no parent should ever have to face." I felt Monique's hand let go of mine, and I could practically hear her gritting her teeth. "I'm sure it is, Bernard," she said, her voice steady and dripping with that sharp southern politeness that masks 1,000 insults. "Losing a daughter is one thing, but losing her mother's legacy? Now that would be the real tragedy, wouldn't it?" There was a brief, sharp silence. I could almost feel Bernard's confusion through the air. "I don't follow you," he replied, his tone narrowing. "Well," Monique continued, her heels clicking softly as she walked toward the foot of my bed. "I was just thinking about the estate. Alexa's mother was very particular about that $485,000 inheritance. She wanted to make sure it only ever went to someone who had Alexa's best interests at heart. She knew that in Charleston, money has a way of disappearing into the wrong pockets." "Are you accusing me of something?" Bernard's voice dropped an octave, the threat clear. "Accusing? Heavens, no," Monique chirped, though the edge in her voice remained. "I'm just reminding you that as the executor of the secondary trust, I have to sign off on any end-of-life financial transitions, including the life insurance. It's a lot of paperwork, Bernard. I'd hate for you to make plans for a trip or a new car, only to find out the funds are tied up in probate for the next 10 years. I wanted to cheer. Monique was playing him like a fiddle. She was letting him know that his easy payday wasn't going to be easy at all. She was giving me time. But more than that, she was baiting him. She leaned back over me, her voice a whisper once more, as Bernard stepped outside to take a stress relief call. "Don't you worry, Alexa," she breathed. "I've got the recording of what he said to Victoria, and I've got one more surprise for him. Something your mother kept in a safety deposit box that he doesn't even know exists." But as Monique turned to leave, I heard a sound that made my non-existent blood run cold. It was the sound of a medical monitor beginning to beep, a slow, steady, rhythmic alarm. And then I heard my father's voice from the hallway, hushed but urgent. "Do it now, Victoria, before Monique gets back with a lawyer." The air in the room suddenly felt like a vacuum, sucking the oxygen right out of my lungs as that alarm continued its shrill, rhythmic scream. I could hear the frantic scuffle of Victoria's expensive heels on the linoleum floor. She wasn't calling for a nurse. She wasn't screaming for help. She was hovering over my bed, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps of nervous excitement. Just adjust the dial," Bernard said. She hissed to herself. I felt her hand brush against the plastic tubing of my IV, her fingers fumbling with the equipment she didn't understand. She wasn't trying to save me. She was trying to ensure I never woke up to tell the world what I'd heard. In that moment, the family betrayal reached its peak. They weren't just waiting for nature to take its course anymore. They were playing God in a hospital room in Charleston, all for a $1.2 million payday. Suddenly, the door didn't just open. It slammed. "Get your hands off her!" Monique's voice thundered through the room like a crack of lightning in a summer storm. I was just checking the monitor," Victoria shrieked, her voice jumping 2 octaves. "It started beeping and I panicked." "You panicked?" Monique's voice was lower now, deadlier. "Or were you afraid she'd wake up and tell us about the cheapest casket Bernard was so fond of?" I heard my father's heavy footsteps rushing in behind them. "What's going on in here?" "Monique, you're hysterical. The stress is clearly getting to you. Victoria was just trying to help." "Help herself to Alexa's inheritance, you mean?" Monique snapped. "I've seen enough, Bernard. And more importantly, I've heard enough. But you've made a very big mistake. You thought the doctors were being pessimistic to protect your feelings. You didn't realize they were being cautious because Alexa's brain activity has been spiking for the last 48 hours. The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like it could crush the building. I fought with everything I had left in my weary, battered soul. I focused all my energy on my right eyelid. I thought about the bridge, the rain, my mother's face, and the sheer, unadulterated rage I felt hearing my father plan my funeral while I was still warm. And then, it happened. The darkness cracked. A sliver of harsh fluorescent hospital light pierced through. My vision was blurry, swimming in a sea of white and gray. But as my eyes adjusted, the first thing I saw was my father's face. He was leaning over me, his grieving father mask half slipped, revealing a look of pure, frozen terror. "Alexa," he whispered, his voice trembling. It wasn't the whisper of a loving parent. It was the sound of a man watching his bank account vanish into thin air. I didn't close my eyes. I stared straight at him, through him. I watched as the blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, ashen gray. Behind him, Victoria looked like she wanted to bolt for the door, her hand still clutching her designer bag, the one she thought would be replaced by a dozen more. I couldn't speak yet. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass, but I didn't need to speak. Monique stepped forward, her phone already in her hand, the screen glowing. "The nurses are on their way, Bernard," she said, her voice as cold as a Charleston winter. "And so are the police. You see, this room wasn't just monitored for heart rates. After I heard your little chat yesterday, I made sure every word spoken at this bedside was recorded, including your instructions to Victoria to do it now." My father's knees hit the floor. He wasn't praying. He was collapsing under the weight of his own family karma. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he didn't deserve, but I wasn't done. As the medical team swarmed the room, I managed to croak out the first words I'd spoken in weeks, words that would ensure my father's funeral plan would actually be the end of his life as he knew it. "I heard about the cheapest casket," I croaked, the words feeling like jagged stones leaving my throat. The room went dead silent. The doctors and nurses froze, but my eyes were locked onto my father. Bernard didn't just look shocked. He looked like he had seen a ghost. In an instant, his face turned pale, a ghostly, sickly white that no amount of Charleston tan could hide. It was the face of a man who realized that his obstacle had just become his judge, jury, and executioner. The aftermath was a whirlwind of justice that felt like a cleansing storm over the Low Country. With Monique's recordings and the hospital's own security footage showing Victoria fumbling with my life support equipment, the perfect life Bernard had built started to crumble. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the ultimate family karma manifesting in real time. As I recovered over the following months, the most satisfying truth of all came to light. My mother, bless her soul, knew Bernard's heart was as hollow as a drum long before she passed. That $1.2 million life insurance policy, it had a specific, ironclad clause. If my death was deemed suspicious, or if I was incapacitated, the funds didn't go to my father. They went directly into a trust managed by Monique, with a strict no-benefit rule for any spouse or parent found negligent. He had been planning to usher me toward the grave for money that he was never, ever going to see. Bernard lost everything. The dealership went bankrupt within 90 days when his creditors heard about the investigation. The prestigious friends he valued so much stopped answering his calls the moment the local news ran the story of the ICU betrayal. He ended up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, buried in legal fees and the crushing weight of public shame. And Victoria? She was gone before the first court date, fleeing the state to avoid the attempted tampering charges, though the police eventually caught up with her. As for me, I am back in my mother's house. I threw out every sterile, cold piece of furniture Victoria bought and brought back the quilts, the photos, and the warmth. I survived the ultimate family betrayal, and in doing so, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. Justice in the South is sometimes slow, like a long, humid summer afternoon, but when it finally arrives, it's as refreshing as a sudden thunderstorm. Looking back, I realized that being trapped in that coma was a strange, painful gift. It allowed me to see the truth without the filters of daughterly loyalty. It allowed me to see who was truly by my side and who was just waiting for the lights to go out. If you believe in justice and love a good karma story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to deal with a family member who only cared about what you were worth to them? Let's discuss it below.